Hello, and welcome to this recorded session where we think about how to write critically in a literature review. We would like to begin by acknowledging the Larrakia people, the traditional custodians of this land. We would also like to pay our respects to elders both past and present and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. To get started, look at the image on the screen. Which do you think depicts criticism and which critique? The image on the left shows the features of criticism, while that on the right shows critique. Did you get it right? How do we distinguish between these two terms? Oxford defines criticism, the more negative of the two terms, as the expression of disapproval of someone or something on the basis of perceived faults or mistakes. In contrast, critique is defined in its noun form as a detailed analysis and assessment of something. Or we can use it as a verb, to evaluate in a detailed and analytical way. When we think critically and when we write critically, when we complete an assessment task such as a literature review, we critique. We don't criticise. Today, we will look more closely at how to do this. Today, we will explore literature review. What is a literature review? Being critical. How do we do this in an academic context? Writing techniques. I will present 4 tips for writing critically. And finally, I will suggest some useful resources to help you develop your skills for writing critically. Before we get started, here is some advice about how to get the most out of this recording. During the recording, on several occasions, I will ask you to pause while you read, analyse, or think about different aspects of the critiquing process. I strongly encourage you to participate in these activities as they will really help you to build your understanding. If you participate actively in this learning, it will help you to write a better literature review. During your time at CDU, you will be asked more than once to write a literature review, either as a standalone assignment or as part of a bigger writing project. So what is a literature review? Pause the recording to note down your own understanding of what a literature review is, what it includes, and what it shows. How closely do these ideas match your own? A literature review is a critical analysis of what is known about the study topic, the themes related to it, and the various perspectives expressed regarding the topic. It should include key sources, highlighting the main debates, trends, and gaps in a specific area. And what does it show or identify? When we review literature, we identify what has been established, areas of controversy or conflict among different schools of thought, what is missing, emerging trends and new approaches, and how your research extends, builds upon, and/or departs from previous research. When we consider all of these requirements, we can see that critique, critical thinking, and writing a critical literature review involves not just summarising, but also analysing, evaluating, and synthesising. Another way of unpacking this is to consider not just what a literature review is, but also what a literature review is not. Pause while you read through the features in the left-hand side of the table. Those of you who are new to literature reviews and critical writing might find the list of what a literature review is not very helpful. This list represents common mistakes of writers unfamiliar with writing literature reviews. A literature review is not a compilation of all materials related to your research field, regardless of relevance and importance to your project. It is not a description and summary of every single available source. It is not a collection of all the sources that you have read and found interesting. and it is not presented in a list where each text is written about independently. Our next step is to think about the difference between summarizing and evaluation. Pause the recording while you read the example on the screen. Is this summarizing, or does it include other processes such as analysis and evaluation? Hopefully, you are able to recognize that this paragraph summarizes. What's more, it summarizes a single piece of research, a single source. If you read closely, you will also notice that the final sentence leads us to the next stage of the critical thinking process. It indicates that the writer is not going to stop with this summary, but is probably going to offer some analysis, evaluation, or their own insights in the paragraph that follows. How about this paragraph? Would you classify it as a summary, or does it include some analysis, some evaluation? Pause while you read and consider. It is evaluative. Here, we don't merely read an overview of another writer's ideas. The voice of the author is clear in this paragraph as they identify challenges, possible new areas of investigation, and controversies related to the topic. This kind of critical thinking is central to writing a good literature review. To write a good literature review, one aspect we need to be mindful of is our selection of literature. We need to ensure that we consider the different types of literature that can be included in a literature review. On the screen, you can see the image of a matrix. This could be created in Excel, Word, or even with pen and paper. The primary purpose of this matrix is to ensure that you include literature that will give you a full picture of your research topic. This may include literature that provides context, such as historical and contemporary background information. You may need to include literature that covers key theories, concepts, and terminology in your area of study. You also can't write a literature review without discussing previous studies. What have they shown? Do you notice any limitations or any gaps? A matrix like this is useful because it helps you keep track of not just what you've read, but also the types of articles you've read. It helps you to make sure you don't focus all your energy on one category at the expense of other categories. I hope you will participate in the next activity. I'm going to show you several paragraphs from literature reviews in published academic articles. For each, I will ask you one or two questions. Pause the recording, answer the questions, and then play the recording to check your answers. Here is the first paragraph, and two questions. What kind of literature is the writer dealing with here? Contextual, theoretical, or does it focus on past research? Question 2. Would you classify this as summary, evaluation, or both? Pause now. How did you go? If you decided that this is contextual information, you are correct. Is it summary or evaluation? It actually contains both elements. It certainly summarizes research conducted by others, but it does also include analysis and conclusions that have been drawn by the author. For example, review of the current literature has revealed to the writer that there is little evidence about the relationship between different forms of assessment and contract cheating. The writer has identified this gap through the process of conducting their literature review. Here is your second paragraph and the same two questions. What kind of literature is this paragraph dealing with? Contextual, theoretical, or does it focus on past research? And the same second question. Would you classify this as summary, evaluation, or both? Pause now. How did you go? If you decided that this is contextual information, you're correct. And is it summary or evaluation? This paragraph is first and foremost a summary of the research of others. Here is your third paragraph. Pause to consider a single question. What kind of literature is this paragraph dealing with? Does it provide context, theory, or does it focus on past research? I hope you decided this literature introduces us to theory. In this case, key concepts, terminology, and definitions. And having a look at the details, this passage introduces the key term, information management, and shows how it is used in a health context. Finally, it introduces important terminology and the framework for the research being considered. Here is another paragraph. What is this? Pause while you read and consider. Hopefully, you can see that this literature review extract looks at past research conducted in the writer's field of interest. Let's look again at some features that we need to consider more deeply. What has the writer done? They have found researchers with similar ideas, and rather than speaking about them one by one, they have grouped the common ideas together. Here we see the ideas from 3 different sources grouped into a single citation. This is known as synthesis. The writer has also identified important themes that have emerged from their review of the literature. Have a look at idea 1, idea 2, 3, 4, and 5. Distinct ideas that have been pulled from a variety of sources and combined into a coherent synthesis. Continuing to look at this paragraph, a range of sources have been used, information has been synthesized, and some key themes identified. So has the writer done enough, or do they need to do more? If you think the writer needs to do more, you are correct. This paragraph describes what has been done, but doesn't include any analysis or evaluation. We can't see or hear the voice of the writer in this paragraph. Fortunately, the writer doesn't stop here, but continues into the next stage of their review. Pause to read this paragraph. Can you identify where the writer evaluates what has already been done and starts to find a gap? I hope you can see the shift in focus in the second part of the paragraph. The writer pulls their reading together to draw some conclusions about what else could be done. Note that to help you with your writing, other structural features have been highlighted here. In red, we can see the way that language is used to identify the gap in the work that has been done to date. Highlighted with yellow, we can see how source synthesis is dealt with in APA. Continuing to consider how we write critically, a successful literature review is likely to include many of the following features. The literature you use will be selected strategically to support your research. Be mindful, though, that strategic selection does not allow us to select, for example, only the shortest papers or only the research that supports our argument. Our selection must ensure that we demonstrate a thorough understanding of our topic of interest. You need to synthesize and reformulate arguments from sources to create a new or more developed point of view. We saw an example of this in the paragraph on the previous slide. You also need to demonstrate skills beyond summarizing. That is, you need to demonstrate your ability to analyze and evaluate. This may include comparing and contrasting different theories, concepts, and terminology from the related literature. As part of this comparison process, you need to indicate the position you are taking for your research. You also need to respond to what you read. You may agree with, confirm, or defend a finding or point of view through an analysis of its merits and limitations. You may concede that an existing point of view has some strengths, but qualify your support by highlighting certain weaknesses. Or you may reject a point of view and give reasons for rejection, such as inadequacy, lack of evidence, fallacies in the argument, or problems with the research. When you are critiquing, when you are writing a literature review, always keep in mind the overarching principles. Successful critique is not criticism. Instead, it is based around ideas, theory, or findings. It is not a personal attack on another researcher. One of the key purposes of critique, particularly the discussion of weaknesses or limitations, is to find a gap and show how your research will fill this. Now that we have discussed critique in some depth and looked at a few examples, we move on to think about how you can develop your own critical writing skills. How does a writer demonstrate their critical voice? Note that writing critically starts with reading critically, so this will be our starting point. As you can see in the slide, critical writing is underpinned by reading critically, taking effective notes, and categorizing our sources. By categorizing, I mean giving consideration to how we will synthesize all that we discover when we are reading. At university, I have no doubt that you will hear the term critical reading a lot, so let's take some time to consider what this actually means. As a first step, when we read, we need to ensure that we understand. Comprehension is important. What does the text say? What are the main ideas of the text? But we need to go deeper. This includes thinking about the purpose of the author. What is the text trying to achieve, and what strategies does it use to achieve them? This could include positive observations related to aspects such as the clear organization of the text or the use of plain language. Depending on what you are reading, you may also be critical of strategies employed, such as the use of overly emotional language or over-reliance on a small number of sources. Being able to consider context is also a key part of critical reading. Look inwards first, as our own context or biases can contribute to how we read and what we see. The context of the author is also important. What do you know about the author? What history or background did they bring to their work? Can you identify any assumptions made by the author and the influence of these on the text? Most importantly, give yourself permission to be critical. Don't assume that because something is published, it is perfect. Don't assume that as a student, there is nothing for you to find, or that it is not your role to find fault. On the contrary, as a student, you must develop the critical reading skills of being able to see strengths, understand limitations, challenge assumptions, and assess the validity and reliability of evidence. These evaluative skills are at the heart of thinking and writing critically. Continuing with the idea of evaluation, to read critically, the kind of questions we may ask include: what are the strengths and limitations of the source or the argument? How well are the claims supported by reasons and evidence? What claims need further investigation? How does the quality of one source or argument compare with others that address a similar topic? What contribution to knowledge does it make? What is your overall assessment of the source or argument? Another key aspect of reading critically is thinking about what to read and how much to read. When you first start reading in preparation to write your literature review, you will definitely read more than you eventually use, sometimes abstracts rather than whole papers. To demonstrate, the student or researcher in this diagram has started by looking at 14 studies, but decided that only some of these are relevant to the idea they are pursuing. We may even find that while a large amount of research is considered in a literature review, it is not all given the same amount of discussion. Some of the research that you find is likely to get more emphasis, while some will be relevant but not seminal. Please be mindful this is only a diagram and in no way indicates how many articles should be included in your literature review. For this information, look at your assessment description or speak to your lecturer. As part of the act of reading, you must take notes. So that you are making the best use of your time, consider note-taking as a part of reading, not as a different step, and not as something you will do later. This means that before you start reading, you need to think about why you are reading and what kind of notes will help you achieve your goals. In this case, we are thinking about how to take notes that will facilitate writing a literature review. When preparing to write a literature review, your notes should identify key points, comment on strengths and weaknesses, facilitate the comparison between sources, and help you transform your reading into writing. Now that we have acknowledged the key role that note-taking plays in effective reading, you need to find an effective method of taking notes. In some cases, this decision is made for you as your lecturer will give you a matrix. If you need to design your own matrix, before you start reading, think carefully about what information you will need to collate while you are reading. On the screen is an example of a reading matrix. This matrix, easily created in Excel, facilitates a detailed reading record for each item that is read, including bibliographical details and key information. It also gives the reader space to make notes if they notice similarities between two texts, or if they want to comment on the relevance of an article to their own work, or write a note about a limitation in methodology, for example. A matrix like this is invaluable in providing a snapshot for easy reference if you want to find an article, quickly review what you've read to date, or start organising your research for writing. The QR code on this screen will take you to the study skills pages about reading, where you can find a similar matrix ready for you to download, adapt, and use. Pause to look at a similar matrix that includes reading notes. We will look at this particular example again later in this session. While a matrix can provide a good overview, for much of what you read, you may also need to take more detailed notes to reflect the purpose of your reading and what you are expected to write. Here we see a student preparing to write a literature review, so their notes include a summary of main points, an analysis of strengths and of weaknesses. Importantly, the student ensures that they are keeping track of the relationships between the articles they read. Understanding the connections between your readings is a key step when it comes to transforming your reading into writing. Consider the example on screen. We would consider this to be very poorly synthesized. Why? Pause to read and consider the problems with this example. The writer has not considered the interrelationship between the articles they have read. Instead, they have considered each article in isolation and presented a summary of ideas that looks more like a shopping list than a literature review. In comparison, look at the sample given on the right. This gives us an alternative structure for dealing with a number of sources. The writer uses the relationships between their sources as the foundation of their discussion, clearly indicating to the reader where they have noted similarities and differences. Here is the completed matrix that we looked at briefly earlier. The focus of the reading that has been recorded in the matrix is Factors for Success in Master's Research, as noted at the top. Now that we have talked a bit more about synthesis, how might you transform this reading into writing? How would you incorporate the reading into a paragraph that could be included in a literature review? What opportunities does the research already done present for future research? Pause, write down some ideas, or if you have the time, see if you can write a paragraph that reflects the information in this matrix. And now, take the time to read through the synthesis paragraph on the screen. Note that the result of the synthesis is the recognition that there is an opportunity for more research, for more exploration. This can be seen in the final sentence. As you are developing your critiquing skills, always keep the important principles in mind. We need to be reasonable and evidence-based. We also need to be respectful of what others have done, to look at what they have contributed. So your critique can focus on strengths, as shown in these examples. If our critique is negative rather than positive, one approach is to be solution-focused. An example of what this might look like is included on the screen. Identify a weakness, but show your own understanding and critical thinking by suggesting what could have been done differently. This again focuses on the idea, not the person, and also gives the reader insight into the research you might be proposing to conduct. Complete the following activity to check your understanding. On the next 2 slides, I will present 2 paragraphs for you to read. Decide which is more critical and why. Here is the first paragraph. Pause to read it. And here is the second. What is your response to the activity? Do you feel that neither is particularly critical? If so, you are almost right. What would be your concerns about the paragraph on the screen? It could come from a very successful literature review. We are only looking at one paragraph after all. This paragraph summarizes effectively and synthesizes sources, but it does not include anything we would consider to be evaluative. Which brings us back to the first example. There is not much to work with here, but we can at least see the voice of the writer, as it is the writer who tells us, based on their analysis, that Tierney's framework is helpful. Let's now look at 4 tips to apply to make your writing more critical. Tip 1. Use language to clearly signal strengths and weaknesses. It is your job as the writer to make your analysis and evaluation clear to your reading audience. Pause while you take a look at the paragraph. Can you identify some of the signaling language? Here's the paragraph again, and we can see highlighted some clear examples of signaling. Tip 2. Be explicit in your identification of gaps. Have a look at the paragraph on screen. The opening, in red, signals very clearly that the writer is going to identify a gap. What word choices complement the beginning of the paragraph? What other language is used to signal the gap? Pause the recording to consider. Highlighted here is the language the writer has used to clearly identify the gaps in the work up to now. Tip 3. Use clear language to signal the comparisons you have made and the differences you have found. Pause to consider what language does the writer use to show that they have found competing ideas. Looking at the highlighted text, can you see that the comparison and the conclusion drawn by the writer is signaled clearly to the reader? The writer has done their research and found a contradiction. And finally, develop your language skills for identifying agreement and disagreement between the articles you read. Make it easy for the reader to understand the relationships you have discovered. The reader should not be required to find these relationships for themselves. To round off our discussion of writing, let's return to the paragraph we looked at earlier. You will recall that we decided the paragraph was a synthesized summary but lacked evaluation. Pause to reread this paragraph. Can you think of anything we can do here to introduce the voice of the writer, to include an evaluative component? Consider this suggestion. Pause to read the revised paragraph. Hopefully, you noticed that the original paragraph content has not been altered. Instead, the analysis and evaluation of the writer has been added and has increased the overall effectiveness of the paragraph. Now it looks more like a literature review. To finish this session, I would like to introduce resources available that you might find helpful when working on your literature reviews. Are you familiar with the University of Manchester Academic Phrase Bank? If so, I hope you appreciate what a fantastic resource this is. If not, use the QR code to take a look around. The Manchester Academic Phrase Bank gives you access to a collection of the common language that we use in academic writing. It is organised into clear functions and themes as the screenshot indicates. For example, do you want to know how to highlight inadequacies of previous studies? Are you worried you don't know the right language to use? Go to the relevant section of the phrase bank. I'm sure you will find this resource useful not only for your literature reviews, but also for your other assignments at CDU. The Language and Learning Study Skills pages include dedicated sections on writing literature reviews. Scan the QR code to find more information and activities to develop your skills. Via the library tile on your student portal or the QR code on the screen, you can find more information about all the library services and resources to support you in your studies at CDU. Before you leave this recording, take a moment to reflect. What do you most want to remember about writing critically, about writing a literature review? Focus on this idea as you work on future assignments. Today, we have explored literature review, being critical, writing techniques, and useful resources. If you have any questions about this recording or the support available for you through the library, please contact us at our email address, askthe.library@cdu.edu.au. Thank you for your time today. I wish you the best for your literature review writing and your studies.